All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dan Bidondi Show, right here on TruthRadioShow.com with your host, Dan Bidondi. And once again, we got Gary Wayne on, and we had to redo the show, folks, because of the last show we had, I messed up on the audio part. So we got Gary Wayne on again, and we're going to be talking about the occult and secret societies within the Third Reich. And I know people, before you say, well, that happened back then, because here's the whole point. You need to know history, or you're doomed to repeat it, because unfortunately what the results who happened back then in the secret societies within the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler and all that, and it also debunks the whole myth that Adolf Hitler was a Christian. And he drove off a complete insanity of the occultic world. He had a fascination for the occult and everything else, and how all this relates to today with some of the federal agencies we got, the space program and everything else, all come from this. And it's just history repeating itself with the gun grabbing going on, attack on your civil liberties. All this come from this. So again, Edmund Burke said, one of the founding fathers, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, plain and simple. And he also said, the only thing evil needs to succeed is for good men to do nothing, plain and simple. So once again, we get Gary on, and we get him on real quick here. And here he is. Gary Wayne, he's the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. If you want this book, Genesis6Conspiracy.com, the website's right there. So here we are. Gary Wayne, how you doing, brother?
Doing just fine, and so glad to be back, and hoping that we're going to, on the redo of the show, that it will be a little bit better, and we bring out some more things that probably won't be quite, identical, but we're going to try and really do this show up so that the information will really make people take a step back and analyze exactly what you were just saying in terms of, nothing is new under the sun, and that this is, analogous for the end time. And we're going to walk through a whole bunch of that tonight, and then talk about some of the maybe lesser known details about the Nazi regime and how it got started and what it was all about on the inside.
Oh, great. Yeah, because again, like we said at the beginning of the show, a lot of people are not aware of this history. And I mean, you yourself heard this all the time. You had these people out there, oh, Hitler was a Christian, and, and they, chastise the Christian movement. It's ridiculous, really is.
It really is. And it was so bizarre that Winston Churchill refused to permit in at the, whether it was the Nuremberg trials or any of the other trials, all of this information with their connections to the occult and what they did, what they believed in, because he was afraid that it would permit the Nazis to submit pleas of not guilty by insanity, because it's just that outrageous. And so that is why a lot of this information wasn't known, and only in the last decade or two has this information come out with declassification, which really starts to connect a lot of dots. And not only is it important to understand that we have to learn from our history, but this is analogous to what the end time will look like. And we're going to draw those parallels as we walk through it. We're going to talk about technology and advancement of knowledge. We're going to talk about a Messianic figure. We're going to talk about a Nephilim new man concept. We're going to talk about the polytheist Babylon religion. We'll talk about the throne of Satan, or the abomination. We'll talk about the Third Reich as a 1,000-year reign. We'll talk about genocides. We'll talk about virile ideology. We'll talk about trying to take over the whole world for world government. And we're also going to link it to things in terms of the occult, about the Grail, iconology, and all the mystical sort of obsessions that this group had, and what their religion was all about. That was, as you said, distinctly different than what Christianity was. And so we need to learn from what happened with the Nazi regimes so that we can prepare people for what is likely to have happen again in the end time, because it's going to be very, very similar. And everything from the propaganda machine that Goebbels did to what's happening in the media today and in entertainment today, that the propaganda will hit a level that actually will make the Nazi propaganda, small. So when we look at that sort of analogy, then there's where do you start with this kind of organization that held so much power? And so I think we'll just sort of start kind of at the beginning in terms of how this whole thing comes, because this wasn't just by accident. This was actually pre-planned and something that kind of got a little bit out of control, well, a lot out of control, at a point where the money that financed them turned against them because of their genocide against the Jewish people. So right out of the gate, what I want to get on the table is that the Nazi regime and the Nazi empire was put together through a combination of mystical religion that we'll cover off, the banking arms that were basically the Rothschild banking Leviathan, working with obviously their stable of agents in terms of bankers, whether it's the Rockefellers or the JP Morgans in North America. So a significant part there that financed the Nazi regime. And of course, the secret societies. And so all of this goes into the planning for setting up the Nazi regime. And then the Nazis were actually sort of, as they were developing, were set up and financed to offset what happens over in Russia. And of course, in Russia, you have the communist revolution, and the Nazis, the money's going to pour into them with their national socialism to take care of the Russians. And it does go rogue. And another thing that we need to sort of put on the table to set the table for what we're going to talk about tonight is National Socialism isn't a right-wing organization. It is clearly left-wing. It's National Socialism, and that's why much of their policies is very similar to the Progressive Society. And before World War II, progressivism was the Western arm of National Socialism. It went underground after the war for obvious reasons. It has popped up again today, which is why we need to understand this whole regime and what they're planning to bring about for the end time. So I thought I'd pause there, Dan, and let you in and see whether or not you have some comments or things that you want to add before we get going.
No, just I mean, it's very interesting stuff, and yeah, it's so fascinating. It really is when you actually dive into the stuff. It's wicked fascinating because it's history. Even though some bad stuff is part of the history and everything else, it's extremely fascinating, and people need to understand and realize this in the truth. Because again, what happened then correlates to everything that's going on today through the mainstream media, the education system, the space program we got, the intelligence agencies we got, all come from this, and it's all a spawn from this stuff going on, and all the disinformation going on. I mean, the ungodliness stuff going on today, the attack on Christianity, especially, is a big time result of this stuff. And I mean, I can't say enough about that. But Gary, great information. And then again, anybody wants to get his book, I got the book right here, and it's, as you can see, it's full of notes and everything else. It's literally a textbook. It's over 700 pages of vital information, man. And I'm telling you, it covers everything from the secret societies to the beginning with the fallen angels. I mean, like, we could spend, I don't know, do a good 100 shows at least on this one book alone. Amazing stuff, and what a great researcher Gary is.
Yeah, and one of the things I did in the books, just so that everybody knows, is that there's so much information in there that I want people to know where that information came from. So I have over 100 pages of endnotes so that people can go and, if they want to verify the sources themselves, it's all there in terms of where my information comes from. So thanks for the plug on my book. Very much appreciated. So, when I look at the Nazi movement, the first thing that I want to sort of explain is how it really starts to rise out of the religion. And in the end time, we're going to have Babylon that comes first. And you need Babylon that's going to bring about the world government. And this is the mystical religion that rides the end time empire. Similar sort of thing happens with Nazi Germany. And in 1875, you have an organization that's established by Helen Blavatsky, and it's a Rosicrucian sponsored society of a religion that is rooted in what I like to call global Gnosticism, or the Gnostics. And there's a global cosmology that they want to build for this end time universal religion. And the Rosicrucians were the ones that were maintaining this Gnostic religion and create Theosophy to be this end time religion that is a bridge between religion and science, designed to be the religion of the end time. And this is the religion that has, for its one of its main icons is the swastika, which is going to be a very much a big part of the Nazi regime. And so formation of Theosophy in 1875 is kind of one of those precursors. And this is going to be taken in by this fledgling partnership of secret societies and banking and Theosophy. And it's going to change and morph into what they call Ariosophy, which, and the term Ariosophy is a blending of Theosophy and the ideology of Arianism, which everybody knows a lot about in terms of what the Nazis were known for. We're going to talk probably a little bit more about those roots as the show goes, but this is the rogue version of the secret society-sponsored Theosophy. And Theosophy is the religion that is the precursor to the New Age movement, which takes shape after World War II and in conjunction with the discovery or the alien phenomena that starts to take off, particularly after Roswell in 1947. So all of this is sort of a continual extension out of the secret societies. Another thing that's going on that happens just before that, that's going to intersect into Germany, is that in 1864, the Pergamon altar is discovered, and they start to excavate it between 1878 and 1886. And this is the church that is part of a series of temples and things in the town of Pergamum, but this had a monstrous altar on it, and it was the altar of Zeus that was there. This is the throne of Satan that a lot of people like to refer to when they throw that term around. And just as we get the throne of Satan talked about in terms of the synagogue of Satan in Revelations, but I'm going to come back to that and bring that in. But again, we're going to have an abomination in the end time where Antichrist is going to be crowned king of the world in the temple, and this is one of those icons that I think is going to be part of it. Is this seat of Satan in the temple that will be based on this Pergamum altar that the Germans actually excavate in the 1800s, and then they bring it back to Germany. So you also have some other groups that are being formed that are going to play a role in the rise of Nazi Germany, beginning with in 1884 with the Fabian Society and the birth of what we would know as social masonry, progressivism, and a whole host of other policies that have been with us ever since. And National Socialism will spring out of this. So you've got communism, you've got socialism, you've got National Socialism, you've got anarchism. All of those names are very, very well known today, except that National Socialism is a little bit further to the center, but not a whole bunch. But it essentially uses private enterprise to work with the government towards the government's goals, and is essentially directed by the government, and it's set up in an oligopoly format, exactly what happened in Nazi Germany and exactly what we're starting to see today. And then you have Hitler, born in 1889. So he's born into what is taking place. So almost as a but not in a good way. And then in 1891, you've got the Rhodes Society being funded by the Rothschilds, that is going to create the round tables, and they're going to create the Inquiry for World Government. And again, you see the banking arm of the secret societies entering in here. And the banking arm of the Rothschilds were set up after the fall of the Templars to replace the banking arm of the Templars outside the Catholic Church. And so, again, you see this partnership that's working together that is inclusive of the Gnostic religions, which is the religion of the secret societies, and the Rosicrucians, and Freemasons and other secret society organizations. And so all of this is now starting to form into almost a nexus point, as it's going to move into how it affects the Germans. And in 1900, Ariosophy is the name of this offshoot religion, and it's a pan-Aryan religion, as I mentioned before. So between 1901 and 1905, you're going to have an order that is going to be established by a person by the name of von List, and this is the Armenian order. And it's a Teutonic Indo-Aryan Illuminati organization. So now I've been kind of mentioning Freemasons, Illuminati, and Rosicrucians, and the Rosicrucians at the higher end of the scale. So there's secret society prints all over this. And the Teutonic Knights are going to be the basis for the SS that's going to be set up. And it's kind of known inside the craft as Nazi Masonry, that's sort of gone rogue from Freemasonry, just as Ariosophy went rogue from Theosophy. And that the Teutonic Knights are from the age of Atlantis and Thule, and are excuse me, and are a sister organization to what the Templars were. They have the Black Cross as opposed to the Red Cross, and all of these knight orders are related, and the Teutonic Knights were a Germanic order of these orders that were created in the Middle Ages. And then in about 1907, you get another organization by a person by the name of von Liepenfels, and the Cistercian monks are forming this, and this is the New Temple Order. And this is important because of orders that are now going to be set up that are going to be uniting this Ariosophy and these secret societies into what's going to become the Nazi religion. And in 1910, you have the new Pergamum Museum built for this altar that's going to be coming back. And I just want to touch a little bit on Liepenfels, the one who builds the New Temple Order, or the Order Novi Temple. And he is, along with von List, who I had mentioned with the Armenian order, they are the architects of Ariosophy, and the ones who are combining secret societies and the orders with this religion that's going to shape the, I guess, the intellectual dynamite that will become the Nazi order. I'm just going to move quickly through, and we'll go in and we'll talk in detail on some of these orders and beliefs that are important later on, but I just want to get the structure of this that is coming together. In 1912, the German Order is established, and they adopt Wagner ideology and the arts into the movement. And Wagner is going to be a very, very important individual as it affects Hitler later on. And his version of Grail tales as it's overlaid with real ideology. And real ideology is about bloodlines. And Vril comes out of the Rosicrucians. And so the Germans believed that they wanted to set up the new man race because they wanted to purify the race and through genetics do so until they had a technology to create a greater new man. And they were looking for a way to backward engineer this bloodline back to the beginning because they believed that this would permit them to by backward engineering, create with the technology a new race that would be greater than the new man that they're trying to do through genetics. And that would be a Nephilim type of individual because they actually believe that the Aryans were giants. And again, we'll come back to that soon. And then in 1918, you have the Thule Society that is formed. And the Thule Society is a very, very important society because it is not only another secret order, but Thule is, in its understanding of the name and the allegory, is like Atlantis. So it's either the Atlantean civilization or it's a sister civilization like Asgard in the Norse mythology. So as you're looking at this, now you've got them taking their ideology all the way back to the giants and creating a secret society and mythos through the Thule Society. And the Thule Society is going to fund Hitler. And it's going to be funded by Eckhart and the Thule Society to bring Hitler to power. And then in 1915, you have Hitler joining the DAP and the Thule Society. And then Eckhart is going to mentor Hitler. So we have all of this building process, and then until Hitler comes along, and Eckhart recognizes Hitler to be somebody who can unite with his oratory and visual presence, all of these organizations and into a movement. And so the Thule Society buys a Volkes Papaker newspaper, and this is going to be part of the propaganda arm that's going to grow into an immense force in the Hitler movement. And so you see all of this coming together as he's rising to power, and none of that's coincidental. And as he's rising to power, the BIS Bank, the Bank of International, via the Schroeder and Reichstag banks in Germany and controlled by the BIS, are going to be funded by the Rothschilds and the Western banks so that they've got the money to come to power, and they want them to take on the communists. As I said earlier, they go rogue. They'll eventually fight the communists, but they've got their whole own agenda. And that's when, at a certain point, as World War II starts, the money is pulled away from the Germans and it's put in the West to defeat the Nazis. So that's kind of a sort of a quick synopsis to naming some of these organizations, and then showing a little bit of a map as to how they come to power. So I'll let you back in here, Dan, and we can start moving into the areas where you want to talk a little more deeper on.
Absolutely, and as one in general, when you mentioned the German Order, I mean, back in the 1700s, where Adam Weishaupt, when he formed the Order of the Illuminati, they also formed called the German Union. Now, the German Union, is that some kind of association? Because it seems like there's a lot of similarities between the German Union and the German Order. Is there?
it's all sort of rooted in that Teutonic society, right? And with the Prussian Empire, that is going to be all mixed into everything else that's going on in the late 1800s and the early 1900s.
Yeah, man. And so I mean, like to me, I call the because I did a lot of study on the German Union and everything. So I call today's mainstream media the new German order, the new German Union, because all the propaganda they do through even through our libraries, the newspapers, the textbooks, the mainstream media and everything else. It's just like it's a giant propaganda machine going on to program people, and it's really sad.
It is sad, and we're getting basically a one-party platform and viewpoint that's registering throughout not just the news media, but through the entertainment. And so this is, as I talk about, an extension of what they did in Nazi Germany, and whether or not it was funding films, whether or not it was funding entertainment, whether or not it was controlling the news, they projected only the progressive or the Nazi, National Socialistic Nazi concepts through the media, and that's the only slant that they got, and they persecuted the other voices, into submission. And what we're seeing today is just the tip of the iceberg to what we're going to see as we get closer to the end time. And I think it's on the horizon. So again, we start to see these organizations start to come together as we start to see the building blocks for world government coming together. So what we're seeing today was done in Nazi Germany, and it's all the same playbook, and it's going to have the same result.
Absolutely. And before we go any further, could you just dabble into Adolf Hitler himself? Because again, like we talked at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of people, unfortunately, out there who believe that Adolf Hitler is a Christian, and these are the same people who deny the Holocaust, same people who deny that Hitler was a bad man. You know what I mean? So in his myth, he was a practicing Christian and everything else, but quickly ignore the fact that he was fascinated in the occult. If you want to just
Sure.
dabble into Hitler.
Yeah, so that Thule Society that Eckhart was part of, and Eckhart is the mentor to Hitler. And Eckhart introduces Hitler into the mysteries. He's not born into the mysteries. He may have some knowledge of it before, but he's really educated by Eckhart into the mysteries in preparation for what he's going to do once he takes power in 1933. And so by the time of the Reich Church being formed in 1933, this is the preparation for Hitler as the Messiah for this new church, an Antichrist type figure, and an Antichrist figure that is predicted by Nostradamus, another Rosicrucian, with Napoleon being the first Antichrist and Hitler being the second Antichrist, with Hitler being an ancient name for the Danube River, and Hitler is born along the Danube River. So he's the second Antichrist. The third Antichrist is the end-time Antichrist. And again, you have a similar situation that took place in the time of Napoleon in terms of the mystical religions and the cult of reason taking over with the revolution, and then you have Napoleon usurping the movement afterwards. But you have this Babylon type religion that de-Christianized the churches during that period of time. And this is what is taking place in Germany, and it is going to persecute Christians at a certain point once they get to there. But they start with the Jewish people. But the religion is polytheist, and they imagine Hitler as their Messiah, as almost an incarnation of Jesus, who is blonde hair and blue-eyed, even though Hitler isn't, but he's an incarnation of him. And this is a church that I would say would be reflective in what we would know of today as Gnostic Christianity, only with that Aryan flair to it. And so it's an interpretive religion. It goes back to the religion of Babel. It has the same pantheon as all of the religions did in the ancient world before the flood, all throughout history. It is not a monotheist religion, and they worship a pantheon of gods at the center of this religion, which is at the adept level. Just as you have that same structure in mystical religions, and you have that same structure in secret societies. It's the same organizational structure now in the form of a ruling government political party that is pulling the strings and controlling the societies within Germany and also the mystical religion. And when Hitler announces the Reich Church in 1933, he actually goes to an opera by Wagner, who is one of their, as I mentioned earlier, one of their principal patriarchs in terms of ideology, because they overlay Grail ideology with the real ideology and the Norse mythology to create this Ariosophic Reich Church that they formalized in 1933. And that's the national church. So it is the church of the empire that he's building. Now, what people don't know necessarily about the Grail, some do, some don't, but most think the Grail is like a chalice. The Grail in the mystical societies and the secret societies is not a chalice. It is a bloodline, and it's a bloodline that goes back to the giants. It's a bloodline that goes back to the Nephilim. And this is part of the pedigree that they want to have in terms of creating this new man and this new empire of 1,000 years, which the Third Reich is, and that's a counterfeit of the end time millennial. But what we should take from that is that they probably won't use as a name, but they're going to have a counterfeit millennium. The point of the matter is that this religion that is being centered at the center and the inside of the political Nazi socialism movement is in no way related to Christianity. They are poles apart in their beliefs and their approach and their interpretation of the Bible and how they view Jesus. And any sort of doctrine that you can think of Christian would not be part of what the Reich Church was doing. And out of the Thule society and out of that doctrine of the beliefs, that's where the anti-Semitic concept comes from. They believe that they, as the descendants of the Atlanteans, the Aryans, they are the naturally born enemies of God and Israel and any offspring of the Israelite religion, which again is Christianity, and we would have been persecuted and slaughtered in the same way that the Jewish people were during World War II.
Yeah, very fascinating history, man. And yeah, again, like we have to emphasize how important it is to know history because you'll be doing the repeat. And I don't mean to keep repeating that, but that needs to be instituted in people's heads because so much stuff that's been hidden from us, especially in the school textbooks, you'll never learn any of this from colleges or universities or any public schools at that. And they just want to completely water it down, and they even try to. I mean, as you can see throughout the universities of the United States here, they're taking statues down, even though we don't agree with some of the statues. Yep. However, they're still part of history. They're completely erasing history out of the textbooks.
Well, they're doing a version of burning the books that the Nazis did, right? So anything that is in non-agreement to that belief system is has to be purged, and that's just part of that left-wing fanaticism that we're starting to see emerge, just as we're seeing the intolerance to Christianity. I mean, there's going to be two genocides in the end time, one first by Babylon in the first 3.5 years, the end time religion, and then by Antichrist in the last 3.5 years. So again, we're going to have the same thing that happened in World War II, and you're also going to have in the end time, at the time of the abomination, when the people of Judea realize who Antichrist actually is, and not who they thought he was as the Messiah, but actually Antichrist by his acts with the abomination, are going to flee. And in Revelation 12, Satan and Antichrist are going to try and destroy them as they're fleeing, because they're no longer part of the religion and the world government, and they understand what mistake that they've made. So we're going to have genocide like crazy in the end time, which was all part of what the Nazis did. And when I talk about how obsessed they were with Grail and occult ideology and mysticism, when we look at the Indiana Jones movie as an example, and we see that the Nazis in that series of movies were looking for things like the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. All of this is based on reality to what the Nazis were actually doing. And so they were looking for things like the lance of Charlemagne. And it's there is one today that is that they found that is in the Habsburg Museum today. It's not. I don't think it's the true one in terms of what they were looking for. Some people might know this as the Spear of Longinus as well, but I think there's the spear that the Nazis were looking for were looking for what they call the Grail Spear of Destiny.
And that's a spear that would press Jesus Christ, right?
Well, that's the Spear of Longinus.
Okay, yeah.
And then the ideas kind of get conflated into one. But there's no way that this spear would have gone back to the sort of the other meaning. So I think they probably were looking for both, I guess is the simple way. But it's interesting that the one that they really were valuing was the Grail Spear of the Destiny, which is also known as the rod of the Anunnaki of the Ring Lords. So right back to Nippur and awarding kings with the right to rule and the divine right to rule with a rod of governing. And so that was one of the things that they were looking for. But they did find this one that's in the Habsburg Museum that is more likely to be, if it's authentic, to be the Spear of Longinus as opposed to the rod of the Anunnaki. And it's also interesting that they to note that they were looking for all of what they would call the Grail Hallows, and that includes all the treasures that would have been glorified by Wagner in some of his Grail romances like Percival and others. And interesting enough, Hitler saw himself as a Grail Knight of the Round Table, and that should be no coincidence as you mix in the understanding that these Grail Knights, as are shown in King Arthur and the Grail Tales, are essentially personified as Templars, and the Teutonic Order that the SS and the Germans were obsessed with were a sister order of the same sort of organization and belief system, just from a Germanic perspective, and separate from the Catholic oversight. But he saw himself as a Grail Knight of a Round Table, and he saw the empire that he was going to be building would be like this world empire using the Round Table or the Lord of the Rings in terms of how the allegory would go back to the Anunnaki. And so they were searching for all of these things, and they sent a whole battalion of forces and an incredible amount of money investment, along with Otto Rahn and his research. And he was an archaeologist and author of the book Crusade Against the Grail. and sent them to Montasegur in Languedoc. And if you don't know what Montasegur is and Languedoc is, if you know what Cathars and Albigensians were, those are the religions of the inner core of the Templars. This was the Gnostic movement that the Catholic Church was trying to purge in the Catholic Inquisition. Languedoc was the home of, and Septimania, which is the greater region, was the home of Saint Bernard, where he took translations of documents that the Templars found and translated them after they came back from Jerusalem. It is the location of where the mystical Jews had settled. It was a location where the Templars were setting up operation. This was an epicenter area of rebellion, and of course where the Cathars were centered from. And so they send in 1944 a whole battalion of SS troops, not just normal troops, but SS, the Teutonic organization. And Otto Skorsenzi is the one who oversaw this excavation based on Ron's research, who's with them. And they actually place a call back to Berlin in March 15, 1944. Or not a call, they sent a telegram back to Berlin, and it says, Eureka. And there's a return telegram that comes back and says, well done and congratulations, await arrival. So they're going to hop on the plane and travel there to find this great source of treasure that they found based on following the Grail treasure hunt and clues that they've had. Now, what they were going on in terms of the information that was provided to them from Otto Rahn is that in 70 AD, the Romans had defeated the Jewish people and taken the temple, and they took the temple treasures back to Rome. And so Alaric of the Visigoths in 410, he actually sacks Rome, and he takes much of these treasures back to the area where the Visigoths lived, just south of Languedoc. And this is the treasure that the Cathars inherit, and this is the treasures that they are digging for. And so some of the things that are documented by a Colonel Buckner of the 45th Infantry, he documented some of the items that were found there, and it's called the Treasure of the Ages. And so fragments of the Ark of the Flood, gold from the temple, pre-runic tablets, precious goblets, black plaques with cuneiform script on them, and it's also thought that they had, now this is more from legend than that we can actually prove, but from Ron's research, Montasegur would have held the tablets of the Destiny of the Ark of the Covenant as well, and significant occult knowledge, and the Spear of Longinus and or Charlemagne and or the Rod of the Anunnaki, depending on how you want to look at that, and the Copper Scroll. And so this is from the Copper Scroll that was found previous, is where they get the directions and the list of things that they're looking for. And this was happening not just in France, this was happening all over the world, that they were trying to recover these kinds of treasures, because they felt that in their mystical religion that this had untapped power that they could tap into as part of what they were planning to do in terms of trying to take over the world and create a sense of awe about not only themselves, and also their religion. So they were creating this propaganda and looking for things that would elevate them to be looked at as a superior race of people.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, like what Gary's trying to explain here, because I know people's like, regular people out there, it's like, wow, where to even begin? But you got to understand, this is just imagine this, if you will. It's a giant witch's pot of, it's a brew of all these toxic chemicals that he's adding in, the secret societies, the occultic religions, philosophy, theosophy, all kinds of garbage, Ariosophy, all mixed in this giant pot that Hitler has actually taken all the occult knowledge of different branches of secret societies and all that, mixed it in to create this one world utopia in their view at the time, and they believed they wanted to bring in the world government at the time by force. And this is correlated here in the United States, where President FDR, I mean, like, a lot of people glorify President FDR, but I mean, the FDR was right along the same plot as these people, and it was crazy, man. That's where the dollar bill got the seal from. That's a whole nother ball of wax altogether. But I mean, it's there's so much pollution in this whole giant conspiracy that people don't even want to dive into the stuff because they don't know, they're overwhelmed. But the other thing is, you got to understand that each of these things is like a giant puzzle. You know what I mean? You pull the boxes out, and they all connect, each and every one of them.
When you start to think about this infrastructure, this is the same sort of infrastructure and organizational structure that has taken over the UN, with the secret society sponsoring all of the different political organizations, and you've got this world government ideology that's coming out, and most of the people of the secret societies that are part, whether it's the CFR or other organizations, they're all polytheists. So it's the same organizational structure. And within that organizational structure, as you get up to that adept level and at the leadership level, whether or not it's in the government or it's in the religious part, they were documented as talking to their ascended masters. Some people call them the Great White Brotherhood. Some people suggest that they were aliens. But it's all the same group of people that they were talking to. And it's part of that connection back to the Rosicrucians who are, that organizational secret order that is positioned at the joining point between the lower secret societies and the pureblood orders that are run by the royal bloodlines, of the Western families in the West. And 50% on the top level of the Rosicrucians are purebloods. And the other ones are kind of rising up through the organizations underneath. And then all the other organizations sort of funnel into the Rosicrucian Society. And the Rosicrucians talk to these same ascended masters, just as Nostradamus was getting help from these same people to make his predictions for the future. Again, look for the commonality, connect the dots. And the Nazis said that they got much of their knowledge from these ascended masters, Great White Brotherhood, demons, aliens, fallen angels, probably a whole mix of those, but they're all really comes down to fallen angels and demons that they're actually speaking to. And what's important about that is you have this bankrupt nation with Hitler taking over. They have no army. They have no money. But within less than a decade, they develop into the most powerful nation on earth that looks like they actually might succeed. And along the way, they develop very early on things like Panzer and Tiger tanks, which is a complete revolution of tank technology. The tanks that they were making were so far advanced that if they could have produced them in numbers fast enough, they would have won any land battle that they were part of. These are the same tanks that are used today to base all modern tanks on. That's how advanced they were. And it came out of nowhere. And if that was just the only thing that they had developed, then you'd say, okay, they had some good people in that end of the military and design, But they also developed blitzkrieg that went along with it, which was a revolutionary new war strategy and tactics on the battlefield that just overran every nation they took on until Russia and the Allies adapted later on. But in the beginning, they just rolled because their strategy and their weaponry was that far advanced. And then they went on to develop things like the single-winged airplane, which is what is used, the stealth aircraft are based on today. I mean, that's incredible, these single winged airplanes that are not detectable by radar. And the Nazis were developing that. And then along with it, they developed the jet engine. And again, if they were able to produce that in enough numbers with enough time, they probably would have won the war. They also produced the rocket engine that was that they used in small numbers, but again, given the time and the ability to produce that in numbers, that may have won them the war. They also had this bell-shaped thing that nobody really understands yet, and there's a lot of different theories on it, but it just shows you that they were developing at a rapid rate technology for war that is completely unaccountable for unless you accept what they're saying, that they were given that information by whoever the adepts of these organizations were speaking to. And this, as we know, these advances in technologies are the basis for our modern society. And along comes Operation Paperclip by the US government. They round up all of the scientists, and they don't get them all, but they get most of them, all of the documents, and they take it back to the U.S., which is what the space program is based on. All modern jet engines and whatever else they were working on that has never been declassified that the Nazis had started. And so you just can't account for this rise in power and this rise in technology and knowledge unless you take the Nazis at their word. And again, this is analogous to what I think is going on today in the end time as we approach it, that our knowledge is now advancing rapidly, and I think we are getting the same help, not for the good of humankind, but for the good of the fascists that want to set up world government. And these are left-wing fascists with a mystical religion. Oh, yeah. And it's preparing us for the rendezvous with destiny that they want to have in the end time with God.
And I wanted to point out real quick, too, because I'm showing some slides. After Operation Paperclip, the SS, they came here, eventually became the Office of Strategic Services, then morphed into what's today known as the CIA. Now, we're not saying all CIA agents are Nazis, but the organization itself was started by Nazis and NASA, a space program. So that's where we get all this stuff from.
Yeah, and one wonders if that had gone over to Russia, what would have happened?
Oh man,
it's just horrible to think about, and and people don't may not remember that the Russians basically starved the Ukrainians and their to death, and trying to get them under control. And there was over 30 million people that is estimated that were killed. And again, you have another example of that kind of genocide with what happened with Mao in China, where there's an estimated 60 million. And so you can take that belief system and look at those three examples and say, if that gets control again, they're going to have a genocide that makes those ones look small by comparison.
Absolutely, and it's so crazy when you actually dabble into this again. Like I said, man, like when you actually do all the research and start going down that rabbit hole, if you will, and you'll start learning how all these things connect. Because again, I know things sound confusing to the average public out there, the general public out there, but when you actually connect these things, you'll see the dots connect yourself and how everything intertwines with each other. And also, too, I know we already passed the subject, but when you talk about the white Aryan race and all that, too, the first thing came to my mind when you're saying the blonde hair, blue eyes, first was the Nordic alien race, then also it sounds like a lot like Joseph Smith from the Mormon religion. So how he said Jesus and God appeared to him as white, blonde hair, blue-eyed people. And it's like almost the same story that Hitler was trying to portray. And it's kind of crazy when you look at a lot of these religions. They have a lot of
Yep.
similar stories.
Yep. And
And
Mormonism has
Mormonism has
that upper elder circle of almost adept-like, so it has a very similar organizational structure as a mystical religion does at the top. And again, typically how these organizations work is that only the adepts know the true beliefs and who they worship, and the lower levels think that they're worshiping the God of the Bible. And, the Templars were the ones that brought that organizational structure. At the core were this Priory of Sion of royal bloodlines of Masonic adepts, and they worshiped, Baphomet and the polytheist religions, just as they received this organizational structure from the Sufis, who are the mystical part of Islam, and who the assassins derive from. They established that organizational structure that is copied by the Templars and then is brought to the West and is the same type of organization that we have all throughout the secret societies and mystical religions in the West. So again, this is something that is transgenerational in terms of what's been trying to form to bring about the end time before, and is what is the same forces that will put these things together to bring about the end time. That's, in my opinion, not that far off.
And real quick, I know we already talked about Madam H.P. Blavatsky, but do you want to quickly explain the Crowley connection? Aleister Crowley, he was a founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
He is, and he was also a Rosicrucian. So again, we shouldn't be surprised with that direct connection. And Crowley was a huge supporter of the Nazis, as with many of the people of the Golden Dawn order, like Yeats and many of the high society, because again, this is a royal bloodline order, as being part of the Rosicrucian order, as I described them earlier. And they were huge supporters, rallying support for the rise of the Nazis, and right up to World War II. And Aleister, Crowley he believed himself to be an antichrist figure that was receiving messages from these ascended masters, and again, totally he was declared after World War II, the most evil person in all of the UK. Like a scapegoat, like Azazel, right? So, again, anytime you dig below the surface, you see these relationships, and it's not a coincidence. They were all working together, and they were working as in very, very closely with the Western progressive movement, the social masonry movement, the labor movement, all of those organizations of the left wing. The Golden Dawn was heavily interactive with, along with other organizations. But because they're the Rosicrucians, they're the sponsors of this whole concept. That's why they had all these other organizations that were set up, along with the Fabian Society and so many of the other groups.
Absolutely, and it's very interesting, especially when you, again, like I keep saying the same thing, when you go into the research of every individual thing we're talking about, you'll see the connections with it. You'll see how everything intertwines with each other, especially when you study people like Aleister Crowley. First of all, I highly recommend you, before you even touch this stuff, to have a spiritual anchor with the Lord and the Bible, because if you don't, you'll become part of that abyss. The abyss that you're looking into, if you don't have a spiritual anchor, you will become part of that abyss, because people like Aleister Crowley, Madam H.P. Blavatsky, these people were literally human demons. I mean, the magic they taught, child pedophilia, child sacrifice, Luciferian magic, fallen angels, and I mean, it's so dense and so disgusting. And this is the stuff that people like Adolf Hitler believed and followed, and all these dictators. So, if anybody could honestly say that Hitler or any of these people are Christian, man, you really need to get a grip of what reality is, man.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to introduce some other names that people may not be all that familiar with, but I'll just make some links into why they're important. There was a poet in the early and writer in the early 1900s by the name of Stefan George, and he was a writer of occult and theosophy beliefs and doctrines, and he co-opted in his writings the title Führer from Longren's Führer from Wagner's play, and Führer is the name for that Hitler is going to adopt, and his writings were used to heavily influence and teach and mold the Hitler Youth that was created in 1923 that would become the growing, as they grew up, members of the SS and totally loyal to Hitler. I talked about Dietrich Eckhart, who was the mentor of Hitler into mysticism and the occult religions, into Ariosophy, that he became famous for his oratory of horrible things in talking about that belief system. And also a member of the Thule Society in terms of where they believe the Aryans came from, the Atlanteans and or the Tuatha De Danann, and the blonde-haired, blue-eyed cosmology of beliefs that all blends together here. And that matched with a scientist writer that Hitler praised and is, again, a pillar of part of their belief system. And his name is Hans Horberger, who's a scientist and author who wrote Glacial Cosmology, and he believed in the giants of Sumeria that were the same as the giants in the Bible. And he believed that humans, superhumans, ruled before the flood. And this is the race that of people that influence the real ideology in terms of how do we recreate these giants of old. There's another individual called Alfred Rosenberg, and he was the maker of the Nazi doctrine and the taught Nazi doctrine, a writer of theology for the Reich Church. And he's one of the pillars, and he was also a member of this Thule Society. He wrote a book called The Myth of the 20th Century, and he proclaimed the death of Christianity, that the Reich was going to demolish and destroy and then absorb Christianity, just as the Babel Empire or the Babel religion of the end time will have a Christian veneer, just as it has two horns of a lamb but speaks like a dragon. It's going to take over Christianity from the inside and have a Christian veneer to it, but it's going to be polytheist Babel of Nimrod at the core. And Rosenberg believed in the Volkisch ideology that in terms of applying it to regain what they would call the German soul, or acquire the spirits and the identity of their ancient past, and bring it back in a reincarnation, so to speak, and or demon possession for an interaction for many of their leaders into the present time. There was another fellow by the name of Ernst Bergman, and he wrote the book, Die Deutsche Nationalkirche. Translation is the German National Church that the Reich Church was designed on, that the theology is based on from Alfred Rosenberg. And he was a member of the German Belief Movement, which was another organization of real and Ariosophy. And he was a member and a believer of the cult of Mithras as well, and he believed Jesus was a pantheist, or a believer in many gods. And he also introduced the ideology into the church as a doctrine based on a racist doctrine which adopted the Vril Society. And Rudolf Hess, which everybody's probably familiar with, he was also a Thule Society member. And so all of these are important people that were helping formulate and uniting this religious secret society movement. Now, there was also another fellow by the name of Hassupper, which is going to connect back into what you were talking about from Crowley and the Rosicrucian Golden Dawn Society. And he was a member of the Golden Dawn and also one of the mentors for Hitler. And he believed in, of course, the Aryan super race. And he was also a mentor of Hess as well, Rudolf Hess. And again, you just look at all of these ingredients of this brew that was creating this Nazi regime, and all of a sudden it got out of control, and the West and the money and the bankers from the West, the Rothschilds and the governments of the West, they weren't sure they were going to be able to actually stop them. And the reason why they were so fearful was because they knew what these beings from the other realm, the ascended masters, whatever you want to call them, the Great White Brotherhood, demons, fallen angels, were helping the Nazis. And so you almost have this dichotomy that the societies that are influenced by what we would call satanic Jews, and I'm not saying all Jews are satanic, but the satanic ones, the Kabbalists, the secret societies of the West and the religions of Gnosticism in the West were now set against this new Ariosophical religion and belief system that had gone rogue and was going to wipe them and their beliefs from the face of the earth as well. And that's exactly what is going to happen with Antichrist. He's going to rise through Babylon, and then he's going to destroy Babylon in Revelation 17 after the abomination. And again, if we don't take into account what happened in history, we're sure to have it happen again. And unfortunately, our blindness to history, our blindness to what is taking place today, our blindness to what is out there in plain sight makes this a certainty. It's just a matter of how fast it happens. And of course, these forces who, in some circles actually say they're going to raise the Fourth Reich, but that won't be the name that they use for the New World Order of the end time, of course, because of the negative connotations that would go along with it. They are preparing to do it sooner than later. Then the only thing that prevents them from having it happen sooner than later is the restrainer, and until the restrainer is removed, they won't be able to do it. But it also allows them more time to develop the technology to make their stand against God and the forces of heaven.
Amen. And if people could actually see the correlation, what's going on, look what they did. If you know anything about the Nazi Youth Brigade and everything else, they used children to push that propaganda. Now look what's going on today. Greta Thunberg being used to push that global warming fraud. And, the climate change and everything else just to push the global government under Greenpeace. They're using people like David Hogg, who wasn't even there, and that's a whole story altogether. But to push gun control, they're using kids to push all this God, anti-liberty, anti-constitutional propaganda, just like they did back then. And the Hitler Youth Brigade, they're using kids once again today to push this propaganda, and it's very disturbing. Then when you get into the mainstream media, like we talked about, the education system, how they basically took civics out of school, so children would not know the details of the Constitution. They even take home ec out. I mean, when home economics, kids today couldn't even open a can with the old-fashioned can opener, simple stuff like that. And it's just like that. It's a complete dumbing down society. So they want to get you dumbed down so much. Now they could institute their reconstruction of their way of education to re-educate these children and these new generations to accept this global ideology and this
Yep.
anti-Christ system, and you've seen it everywhere. It's very scary. It really is.
And they have it in place. I mean, schools and universities are brainwashing organizations today, and so this has been in place for well over 20 years, and so you're going to see the younger generation turn against the older generation as being obsolete and not enlightened, or I guess the term today is woke. And if people don't understand what that meaning is in terms of being illuminated, that's illuminated into the polytheist mysteries. That's being an adept. That's like the 1,000 points of light like the Bushes used to talk about. By the way, the Bush family was heavily involved in working for the funding of the of Nazi Germany, not obviously George Bush and George Bush Sr., but their parents and grandparents were heavily involved in getting that whole thing set up. And again, that's why it just passes on to through the governments of the West, and they're all related, they're all interactive, and they're all working directionally to achieve the same goals. So you have all these different organizations, and the reason why people don't want to really look at it, because it's so large and so big and so awful, that to accept that could actually be true is just too much for people to want to actually come to grips with. And combine that with the brainwashing that's been going on, and it's not just in the schools, it's the media that we talked about earlier, and it's in all the entertainment. All of this is preparation to accept what they're going to force on us. And the naysayers, like Christians like ourselves, are the ones that are going to have to be persecuted and slaughtered, because we're not going to sit there and not object. And so I think Christians en masse are going to oppose them, and that's just going to probably, give them the excuse to slaughter us en masse. And it's just the first genocide, and then you have the second genocide as well. So it's all being built.
Matthew chapter 10, verse 21, actually the whole context, if you want to read it, chapter 10, verses 19 through 22, it's clear. It states, brother will turn against brother, children will rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. And this is Jesus speaking of the end times, what's going to happen.
Yes. It's very, 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 very clear in the Gospels as to what's going to happen. And Timothy talks about that godless generation as well. And we have to understand that this has been taking place. They've been leading people away from God through education and entertainment and the media and the peer pressure that goes with it. Now they're going to use them as what you were talking about as weapons against us and against the older generation. And along with that, you're going to see deceptions that are going to deceive even the elect, if that were possible, and it is, because Jesus says so. And so we're going to have a propaganda and persecution all going on at the same time, in that is on levels that we can't even imagine today. So it's going to get way, way worse. This is just the opening sort of gambit that we're seeing in terms of the media and education and the intolerance towards anybody who doesn't agree with this fascist, progressive, left-wing agenda.
And it's not, you need to understand, it's not just here in America. Gary is from Canada. He's experienced the same exact stuff we experience here in the United States of America. People in Germany, people in France, people all over the planet that are being persecuted for Christianity. And I can't say too much because YouTube, is politically correct. I'm just going to the Rainbow Club, okay? I'm going to leave it at that. You go against the rainbow, They banned you, they shut you down. But
Yep.
the First Amendment here in America only applies to them, apparently, I guess, because they could, have floats on the pride parades of Jesus making out the disciples. But you say anything against it, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're everything else in the book. And but we're seeing this all over the world, man.
Oh,
It's crazy.
Christians are being
Christians are being
persecuted in
persecuted in
134 countries
134
around
countries around
the world as we speak.
134 countries. Well, that's unheard of, man. And it's going to get worse.
Hmm. It is, and it is, and look what happened in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq, where the Christian community was basically wiped out.
Yeah, I forget what country it is. Christians are getting slaughtered literally by the day.
Yep.
I think it's Nigeria, I believe. But I mean, and the media's not talking
Yep.
about it.
Yeah, over in India and in Pakistan, particularly in Pakistan, but in
Yep.
India as well, Christians are very much persecuted people and killed on a very regular basis. China persecutes Christians. They have this veneer of a Christian church where they have, communist edited Bibles, but typically the Christians are rounded up and put into concentration camps over there, and there's a real Christian movement that is an underground movement that supplies Bibles and help and risk their lives to go over there. True Christians who want to worship Christianity from the Bible that we have and in a true Christian manner, they have to worship in the middle of the night in caves over there. And so, I mean, they are really, but yet there's this significant, almost like Jerusalem church dynamism that is going on with the Chinese church, that they're growing in numbers. That I think again is another sign that the end time is on the horizon. So no matter how they try and eliminate us, it's impossible. And the only way that we can be eliminated is to destroy the whole world, which Jesus will prevent before they actually do that.
Absolutely, and he even said, he'll cut those days short unless all men will be destroyed, because Christianity is rising regardless of the propaganda being pushed out against us, regardless of people being put to death. Christianity is still rising, and people literally being beheaded for their faith. This is scripture too that says in these times people will be beheaded for their faith, and at the time when it comes for the mark of the beast, the same thing, man. And we're going to suffer a heavy persecution, but you know what? Jesus told us so, and he says one good thing that people need to really be encouraged by: when these things begin to happen, remember that I told you so. But do not be in despair, but be in good cheer, because it's that much closer for his coming. And when he comes, folks, I'm telling you, he's going to bring a sword upon every evil person on this planet, every evil entity, every evil spirit, every evil demon. I mean, everything that's evil, there's a sword coming upon them, and it's by the hand of the Almighty Creator and our Lord and Savior Messiah, Yeshua Jesus Christ.
Amen.
So, Gary, I guess we're gonna have you back on again, and I don't know if you're done with the subject here, but we're gonna have you back on again, and we're gonna talk about because there's a lot of stuff going on about. Again, more deception as usual. More deception, because these videos going on is huge. It's called Hermes and the Emerald Tablets, and also about the Seven Sages of with the Atlanteans and everything else. I wanted to bring it back on and actually expose who Hermes really is and everything about the so-called Emerald Tablets and the truth about them, because these videos, I mean, it's crazy, man. You go look at the Hermes and the Emerald Tablets, they got millions of views, and people actually dabbling into the stuff, thinking this is a source of truth, pulling them away from the gospel. So this is a very critical subject, too.
Yeah, and this is all of the stuff that the Nazis were trying to get their hands on. I mean, all of that. They really wanted to create that antediluvian age in terms of when the gods intermixed with humankind, and they had complete control in all the cult centers around the world with their religion and all of this knowledge that's represented by the Emerald Tablet as part of the allegory goes with it. So yeah, it'll be a great topic to go through, and who Hermes is, and the seven sages is one of those, again, very, very interesting topics in terms of how they account for civilizations starting up after the flood.
So that'll be next week. We'll have the interview with this. And how could people purchase your book?
The easiest way is to go to my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6.com. And on the website, you can, first of all, go and read a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on my book, and you'll get a good feel for the book. And from there, you can link in to buy a signed copy from me, or you can link from there, on the same page over to barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com or amazon.ca. And you can also link into the Kindle format if you want to buy the digital version. You can also get a hold of my book through most online bookstores. And in Canada, for any Canadians that might be listening, it's available in many of the Chapters and Indigo stores, and certainly available through them. And for anybody who wants to support their local bookstore, if you don't find it on the shelf, they can order it in for you if you want. It's stocked and distributed by Bookmasters out of Pennsylvania, which is one of the larger book distributors to the retailers. So the book is fairly readily and easily available. Just a matter of which format and where you want to buy it from.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. And I want to thank you once again for coming on, and we'll definitely look forward to next week because this is another fascinating topic that people need to be aware of because the evil deception out there is insane. And of course, YouTube don't attack channels like that. They don't attack the lies. They attack people like us. So
Yes.
why I still got this platform, knock on wood, thank the Lord Heavenly Father to protect this platform and to get this information out. And again, I got my own book right here. Great. It's a textbook, man. And it's not a book that you can't just zip through. You need to really, it's taken me a while to read it because what I do is I'm highlighting things, doing further research on different secret societies and orders and everything else and stuff that I don't know about. And English is very good in this book because there's a lot of words I didn't know. I'm like, wow, I got to research what that word means. And but what an amazing book. I can't say enough about it. And also I want to quick plug out to Now You See TV, nystv.org, and NYSTV right here on YouTube. You'll see Gary on there a lot. He's been on there, I don't know, 100 times probably. And that's what David Carrico, John Hall and John Pounders and Jake Grant. What a great show. So I'm sending a plug out to my guys out there. And I'm on co-host as well with John Hall once a week on The Cutting Edge. And that's every day, weekdays, 8 a.m. and also the Midnight Ride, 11 p.m. Eastern on nystv.org. And Gary, any closing comments?
If people want to get a hold of me in terms of asking me a question on something or getting some information, I have a lot of documents, on that really go in depth on some subjects, and I put out a commentary post about every 2 weeks. So if you're interested in following me, you can get a hold of me through my website. There's an email there, ask me questions, or through Facebook under Gary Wayne, or at Twitter at Gary Wayne63, at Gary Wayne63.
Awesome. And again, want to thank you one more time, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. It'll be a great show.
Okay, if you want to stay right there, quick, let me just close the show here. All right, guys, thank you for joining us once again. Again, another great topic, the occult and secret societies within the Third Reich. And next week, we're going to be talking about the Emerald Tablets and Hermes and the Emerald Tablets. Okay, it's late at night, guys. I apologize. And the Seven Sages, because there's a lot of misinformation going on. And as you see, my logo exposing the deeds of evil. It's Ephesians chapter 5. That's I try to do that the best I can, and bring on great people like Gary Wayne and his book. I can't say enough. Genesis, the number 6 conspiracy.com. All the information's right there, and his social medias and everything else. So this is Dan Bidondi and Gary Wayne for TruthRadioShow.com, and we will see you soon. Let me just get the close out here, and I apologize, folks. Just the OBS. Yeah, we're working on this new system. It's our online broadcast service, so we're trying to get a little bit better. So, anybody like the show? Just go to TruthRadioShow.com. Check me out. Shalom and God bless.